The kitchen was still dim, the faint light of early winter slipping past the blinds and pooling on the tiled floor. My old refrigerator hummed behind me, steady and indifferent. As I set my mug of black tea on the counter and opened my laptop, my inbox blinked with its usual corporate gray. 100 unread messages stacked like bricks. One subject line caught my eye: pension adjustment notice, Strata Growth HR. I clicked, and the world went quiet except for the fridge. Dear Ms. Whitmore, as part of our ongoing cost optimization initiatives, your pension benefits are temporarily suspended pending a strategic review. We appreciate your understanding and commitment to the company. No greeting beyond that. No call. Not even a human signature, just Strata Growth HR and a series of numbers in the footer, like a receipt for groceries. My throat tightened. 30 years of work. And I was reduced to a line item. I read it twice, 3 times, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less cruel. They didn't. Then I noticed the attachment, a PDF labeled Restructuring Overview, Q1. I clicked. The first page was glossy and soulless new era, leaner growth. But by the 3rd slide, my pulse slowed to a cold crawl. My name, Ellen Whitmore. Founding partner was gone from the company history. The photos from the early days, the tiny rented office on West 9th Street in Cleveland, the first trade show we'd survived on stale sandwiches and adrenaline, all rewritten to make it seem as if the new CEO, Nathan Cross, had built it from scratch. A few pages later, a bullet point hit me like a stone HQ building acquired 1995 slated for sale. Pending board approval. That building wasn't just an asset. I had written the personal check for its down payment when the bank wouldn't take our calls. It was where I'd slept on the floor during the blackout of '99, guarding servers with a flashlight and a thermos of cold coffee. Now, in a single PDF, I was gone, like I'd never existed. My tea had gone lukewarm, the taste metallic in my mouth. I closed the laptop slowly, my hands trembling just enough to rattle the spoon against the mug. I sat in the silence of my Cleveland kitchen, watching my breath fog the window above the sink. The company I had built from nothing had just erased me with a button click, and somewhere in that glass tower in Chicago, someone thought I would simply disappear. I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, my knees protesting with each creak of the wood. A faint smell of cedar and old insulation wrapped around me, and the single bulb overhead flickered to life with a reluctant buzz. Dust floated in the beam of light, and for a moment I stood still, letting memories seep in like cold air through the rafters. Boxes stacked against the far wall held 3 decades of my life, the pieces of myself I'd packed away when I thought I wouldn't need them again. I knelt and brushed the dust off a box labeled 1990s, office in my own faded handwriting. When I lifted the lid, the past rose to meet me. A crumpled photo stared back me in an oversized blazer, hair pinned back with too many bobby pins, standing beside a server rack in our first tiny office. I could almost hear the hum of the old fans, feel the stiff carpet under my shoes. That was the year I slept on the office floor for a week straight during the .com crash, refusing to leave until we stabilized the system. Another memory stabbed deeper, the wedding invitation I never used. My daughter had walked down the aisle without me in 2003 because I was in Chicago, negotiating a last-minute vendor deal that kept the company from bankruptcy. She forgave me eventually, but I had never forgiven myself. I pushed aside the photos and old manuals until my hand brushed a familiar corner. There it was, a thick, black binder. Edges scuffed. The gold letters on the spine dulled with time. Whitmore Founder Docs. I carried it to the small table under the bulb. Coughing as a cloud of dust rose like a ghost. Inside were the company's original bylaws, equity agreements, board signatures I hadn't seen in years. A folded letter slipped out and landed in my lap. I unfolded it carefully. It was from David Harland, my late co-founder. If they forget you, remember Clause 9b. It exists to protect you. I ran my thumb over his slanted signature, a tremor passing through me. The grief of being erased coiled tight in my chest, but under it, something sharper awoke a quiet, deliberate resolve. I turned the binder's pages slowly, searching for the clause that could turn their betrayal into their reckoning. The binder's spine creaked as I turned the yellowed pages, my fingertips brushing over the familiar texture of old legal paper. Years ago, I'd signed these documents in a cramped conference room that smelled of stale coffee and new carpet, never thinking I'd need them again. And then, there it was. Clause 9b. A single paragraph buried on page 19. Any material adverse change to the undersigned's compensation shall trigger an immediate severance payout of 40 million USD, payable within 72 business hours. I stared at the words until they stopped feeling real, my finger tracing the 1995 blue ink signature beneath them. Ellen Whitmore. Clear and steady. Beside the spidery scrawl of the board chair, long retired. We'd called it a kill switch back then, a paranoid little insurance policy my first lawyer insisted on. I'd laughed at the idea. We weren't worth 40,000, let alone 40 million, yet here it was, alive and waiting. A slow warmth spread through me, not joy, not anger, just the solid weight of certainty. They had tried to erase me, but the paper remembered. I carried the binder downstairs and set it beside my laptop. My tea had cooled, leaving a bitter aftertaste. But I sipped it anyway as I opened a blank email. I typed a single line to Stratagrowth Legal, hands steady on the keys, subject Clause 9b per founder agreement. Clause 9b is now active. No exclamation points, no threats. Just the quiet pull of a lever they didn't know existed. Then I began the careful work of building my wall of proof. I dug through old drives for board minutes, scanned emails rejecting the 2014 compensation restructure, and bookmarked the notarized copies of our original bylaws. Every document was a brick, every timestamp another layer of armor. The house was silent except for the soft chime of files syncing to my cloud backup. Outside, the gray sky over Cleveland felt heavy with snow. Inside, the weight had shifted. They thought I was a line item, a ghost to delete. By the time I closed my laptop, the fuse had been lit, and I was ready to watch the spark travel. The reply from Chicago arrived before noon the next day, a ping on my phone that made my stomach tighten. I opened it and read the single paragraph. Smooth and dismissive, Miss Ann Whitmore. The reference legacy clause is no longer enforceable under current compensation structures. No action will be taken. Best, Brent Keller, CFO, Best. He had the gall to sign off with Best as if he were declining a lunch invitation, not dismissing a 30-year contract and a $40 million obligation. I set the phone down on the counter and stared at the steam curling from my tea. It was the kind of arrogance only someone high in a glass tower could carry, too far removed to hear the floor creak beneath him. Minutes later, another notification chimed, this one unintentional, a CC from Marisol Vega, junior associate in the legal department. Her note was brief, almost hesitant. Located notarized original founder agreement from 1995. Ellen Whitmore signature present. No rescission or override documented in compensation files. Reviewing for enforceability. I let the corner of my mouth curl upward. Not a smile of joy, but the faint, cold acknowledgement that the trap had closed around its first paw. I pictured the scene in that Chicago HQ, the modern glass tower I'd helped finance, where sunlight bounced off sterile conference rooms and everyone spoke in acronyms, somewhere. Brent Keller was clacking his pen in irritation. Nathan Cross was pacing with that startup energy he mistook for leadership. And Marisol Poor. Accidental Marisol was discovering the kind of document that made careers or ended them. The tremors began quickly. Even from hundreds of miles away, meetings rescheduled without explanation. A town hall moved to next week. I could almost hear the whispers traveling through hallways. A shift in the air that only comes when people sense blood in the water, but don't yet know whose. I didn't forward the email. I didn't respond. I simply took a slow sip of tea and added Marisol's message to my growing archive. Every word, every signature, every timestamp was another thread in the net I was weaving. By the end of that day, the house was silent again, and so was I. But the company that thought I was gone had already begun to tremble. I created a new folder on my desktop and named it with the kind of precision that would keep any lawyer awake at night. Clause 9B Enforcement. Inside. I began stacking the bricks of my quiet fortress. First came the old contracts, scanned and watermarked, their signatures clear under the aging ink. Then the time-stamped emails from 2014 where I had rejected the so-called compensation modernization with a single, decisive line. Original founder status remains unchanged. I added the board minutes, the bylaws, and the notarized copies that still bore the faded stamp from the Cleveland clerk's office. On top of that foundation, I dropped screenshots of Brent Keller's email, his curt dismissal, and that insufferable best, now frozen in a digital frame. The folder was filling with the kind of quiet ammunition that didn't explode in a flash. It burned slowly, like a fuse crawling toward a charge no one could disarm. By midweek, the outside world began to react to the tremor I had started. Vendors called me privately, their voices lowered as if someone might be listening. One longtime partner asked if I'd heard the whispers about Stratagrowth's internal freeze. Another mentioned that investors were quietly reviewing risk exposure, a polite way of saying they smelled smoke. I said very little. Mostly, I listened, nodded, and filed each call into memory. I never raised my voice or sent a warning shot. I didn't need to. Silence was doing the work for me. For the first time in years, I could feel the power shift not in a triumphant surge, but in the slow, deliberate slide of balance. From the boardroom to my living room in Cleveland, they were still ignoring me in official emails, but I could feel the panic creeping through the cracks of their glass tower. When I closed my laptop that night, the room was dark except for the faint glow of the screensaver. I sat back in my chair, calm and steady, knowing the grenade was already rolling across their polished floors. The email from my lawyer arrived late in the evening, long after the street outside had gone dark. I had been sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile, reviewing my folder one more time, when the subject line appeared, Confidential Internal Correspondence. I opened it and saw a single forwarded message, clipped from Stratagrowth's legal chain. She's too old to fight this. Stall her out. She'll cave or croak. The words didn't shock me. They landed with a quiet, deliberate weight, settling deep in the pit of my stomach. After decades of carrying that company through recessions, power outages, and the sheer arrogance of youth in suits, I had been reduced to an expiration date. I read the line twice, then a third time, and a stillness settled over me. I didn't slam the table or mutter a curse. I didn't need to. My anger didn't flare hot. It cooled, sharp and surgical. It was if they wanted to measure my worth in years. I would answer with a signature that could outlast all of them. I forwarded the message to my lawyer with a simple line, add to enforcement file. Then I opened a blank document and began to draft a formal notice to the board. My tone was calm, almost polite, but every word was a blade. Per founder agreement. Clause 9B remains active. Attached is documented evidence of internal age-based obstruction and acknowledgement of contractual validity. Please confirm wire transfer timeline and point of contact for execution of payout within the contractual 72-hour period. I attach the whistleblower email, the bylaws, the notarized founder agreement, and the time-stamped rejection of the 2014 package. By the time I hit send, the house was silent except for the whisper of the furnace. I closed my laptop and leaned back, feeling the same stillness I'd felt years ago before a boardroom vote that could have ended the company. Except this time, the vote wasn't theirs, it was mine, and I had already cast it. I checked my watch as the first morning of the 72-hour countdown began. The second hand swept with a quiet confidence, indifferent to the anxiety building hundreds of miles away in Chicago. I watered the philodendron on the windowsill and scribbled a line in my leather journal. Day 1, patience is the sharpest weapon. The first tremors reached me by phone that afternoon. My lawyer forwarded a note from a banking contact. Strata Growth's accounts had been flagged for review. Large corporate payouts tied to executive agreements always raised eyebrows, and mine was sending up flares. By the next day, the ripples grew wider. A vendor I'd known for 20 years left me a voicemail in a lowered voice. Hey, Ellen. We're putting our next shipment on hold until we get clarity. Something feels off. I didn't call back. I didn't need to. Silence was the strategy, and silence was winning. Inside the glass tower, they were scrambling. I could see it in the digital breadcrumbs shared drives, locked by compliance, meeting invites with subject lines like urgent and realignment, and the sudden radio silence from Brent Keller. The man who had signed his dismissive best now left no trace at all. On the second evening, I brewed another cup of chamomile and watched the snowfall gather on the porch steps. My world was quiet, the hum of the fridge, the soft scratch of pen on paper as I noted the timeline of their mistakes. Meanwhile, Strata Growth's world was fracturing. I pictured Nathan Cross pacing in some glass-walled conference room, legal counsel huddled around a table, watching the hours slip through their fingers like sand. By the time the third morning arrived, the houseplants were watered, the journal updated, and my cloud folder mirrored twice over. My watch ticked toward the close of the window, steady as a drumbeat. They had started the countdown the moment they tried to erase me, and I wasn't going to stop it. When the last day ended and the 72 hours expired, I sat in my kitchen, calm and steady, knowing the fuse had burned all the way to the charge. The 72 hours ended without a single confirmation, no wire transfer, no acknowledgement, just silence. That silence was louder than any boardroom argument I'd ever sat through. At 12:01 p.m., Clause 9b escalated automatically, and the chain reaction began. The first alert came from my lawyer. Interest had kicked in 3.2% per business day, and fiduciary notifications had been sent to Strata Growth's primary banking partners. By that afternoon, automatic default status registered in their system. The clause had been designed like a pressure valve. Once they ignored it, the entire legal machinery moved on its own. The next morning, the world found out. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Founding clause triggers. 40 million liability for Strata Growth. A second followed. Hidden contract threatens tech firm's liquidity. By lunchtime, the story hit Bloomberg, then the finance blogs. I pictured Nathan Cross in his glass office, blinds half drawn against the Chicago winter, as his empire rattled under its own arrogance. Investors began calling emergency meetings, some remote, some in person, and the stock tickers slid like ice. These were men and women who didn't care about pensions or history, they cared about exposure and risk. And right now, Strata Growth reeked of both. I sat in my Cleveland kitchen with my journal open, adding each headline as a timestamp in my quiet chronicle. My tea steamed beside me, the scent of chamomile and orange peel soft against the metallic edge of corporate panic. Every vibration of my phone told me that the walls were tightening around them without a single word from me. By the end of the day, my lawyer reported that external counsel had taken over communications. Brent Keller had vanished from all internal channels, and Nathan's executive assistant had sent a vague inquiry about potential resolution pathways. The power had shifted entirely. I closed my journal and looked out the window at the snow gathering on the sill. Their collapse had begun, and it required nothing from me but patience. The next move would not come from my hands, it would arrive, quietly, in the form of numbers. On Monday morning, I opened my banking app before the kettle had even finished boiling. A single line glowed against the white screen incoming wire. $40,000. Clause 9B settlement. No fanfare, no message, just numbers, clean and undeniable. I stared at it for a long moment, letting the weight of 3 decades settle into that single line of text. An hour later, the email arrived. Dear Ms. Whitmore, please accept this confirmation of the full severance payout in accordance with Clause 9B of your founder's agreement, including accrued interest and legal fees as stipulated. Your contribution to this company is immeasurable. On behalf of Strata Growth, I sincerely regret the oversight and the circumstances that led us here. Warm regards, Jeremy Larkin, acting CFO. I read it once, then closed the tab. There was nothing left to say. My silence would speak louder than any reply. The house was calm, the same as it had been every morning before this one. Outside, snow drifted in lazy spirals across the porch. Inside, I moved through the kitchen with a steady rhythm pouring tea, rinsing a mug, watering the small plant by the window. I felt no surge of glee, no temptation to call anyone and gloat. Satisfaction came in the form of quiet equilibrium, the kind that hums under the skin and leaves the air still. I thought of the years they'd taken for granted, the Sundays I'd spent on planes, the nights I'd slept on the office floor, the family dinners I'd missed. None of it could come back, but in this moment, I had taken something they could never erase: acknowledgement, written in the only language corporate arrogance understands: payment. By noon, I'd packed a small duffel bag and set my leather journal on top, ready for the next chapter of my life to begin somewhere far from their glass tower. The road to the cabin was long and empty, winding through the quiet hills of upstate New York. 6 hours of steady driving gave me more time to think than I'd had in years. But the thoughts were different now, no longer sharp with betrayal, no longer heavy with the weight of what they'd done. The hum of the tires and the rhythm of the highway softened everything. By the time I turned down the narrow gravel drive that led to the lake, the noise of strata growth felt like a distant storm I had finally outrun. The cabin appeared as it always had, crouched among bare trees, its roof patched with years of fallen leaves and quiet winters. I parked by the porch and stepped into the brittle cold, my boots crunching against old snow. The lake stretched out before me, glassy and still. The kind of stillness that felt like it could hold a secret forever. Inside, I lit the small fireplace and boiled water for tea. The heat rose slowly, filling the room with the faint scent of pine and smoke. I pulled my leather journal from the duffel bag and opened it to a fresh page. My pen moved without hesitation. They tried to erase me. I answered with a signature. I left with what I was owed, no more, no less. I paused, letting the ink settle before closing the journal. Outside the window, the lake caught the gray light, rippling faintly under the touch of the wind. Steam rose from my mug, curling like a quiet signal into the cold air. I leaned back in the old wooden chair and let the warmth of the tea settle into my hands. There was no victory parade, no dramatic phone call, no applause, just the soft hiss of the fire, the whisper of wind across water, and a life I had reclaimed by refusing to raise my voice. The lake held my reflection, calm and unbroken, as if it had been waiting for me all along.